Judge Robert Wilson tapped his gavel on the wooden bench. The small courtroom fell silent. After 25 years as a judge in Millfield, he knew how to command respect. Case number 103, traffic violation, Mary Thompson, called out the clerk. A woman in a simple blue dress walked forward. She stood tall with her head held high. Her dark skin contrasted with the mostly white faces in the courtroom. Judge Wilson looked down at her with a stern face. "Miss Thompson, you were driving 12 miles over the speed limit on Oak Street." "How do you plead?" he asked in a firm voice. "Your Honor, I admit I was speeding, but I was rushing to an important meeting about." "Just your plea, please," interrupted Judge Wilson. "Guilty or not guilty?" Mary took a deep breath. "Guilty, Your Honor, but there were special circumstances I'd like to explain." The judge frowned. "The fine is £200. Next case." Mary didn't move. "Sir, please. I was heading to an emergency meeting about the water problems in East Millfield. Children are getting sick." The judge's face hardened. "The fine stands, Miss Thompson. Pay the clerk on your way out." A small spark of hope remained in Mary's eyes as she tried once more. "I understand the law, but I was trying to help our community." The courtroom watched in silence. The young clerk behind Judge Wilson shifted uncomfortably. He leaned forward and whispered something in the judge's ear. Judge Wilson's eyes widened slightly. He looked at Mary again, this time more carefully. "Miss Thompson, are you the Mary Thompson who sits on the town council?" Mary nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I represent East Millfield, where we have a serious water crisis. I was on my way to meet with health officials when I was stopped." Whispers spread through the courtroom. Judge Wilson's face showed a mix of surprise and embarrassment. "I see," he said slowly. "And why was this meeting so urgent?" Mary's voice grew stronger. 3 children were taken to hospital yesterday. The water in East Millfield has turned brown. Families can't drink from their taps. They can't bathe their children. Some have lived with this problem for months, but no one is listening. Judge Wilson tapped his fingers on his desk. For the first time that day, he truly looked at the woman standing before him. Not just another case number, but a person trying to help others. "The law must apply to everyone equally," he said. Then he paused. "However, the court does have some flexibility in how penalties are applied." Mary waited, hope returning to her eyes. "Instead of the fine, I will allow you to complete 20 hours of community service, which you may fulfill through your work on the water crisis." "Thank you, Your Honor," Mary said with genuine relief. But Judge Wilson wasn't finished. "After court today, I would like to hear more about this water situation. It sounds like something that needs immediate attention." A small smile formed on Mary's face. "I would appreciate that very much." As Mary turned to leave, Emma Barnes, an elderly woman waiting for her own case to be called, caught her eye and nodded with approval. Emma had lived in East Millfield for 40 years. She had been bringing bottles of the brown water to town meetings for months, but no one had taken action. Later that afternoon, Mary showed Judge Wilson photographs of the contaminated water. She explained how the pipes in East Millfield hadn't been replaced since the 1960s. She told him about families spending money they didn't have on bottled water. Judge Wilson listened carefully. When Mary finished speaking, he picked up his phone. "James," he said to his old friend at the local newspaper, "I think there's a story you need to cover. It's about time someone listened to the people of East Millfield. Sometimes it takes just one person willing to listen, one moment of understanding, to begin to right a wrong. And sometimes, that understanding comes from the most unexpected places, like a simple traffic court on an ordinary Tuesday." The end. Here's the 800-word story in simple, third-person narrative style. Mary Thompson stood nervously in the courtroom, her hands slightly trembling. She had been caught speeding, and now faced a £200 fine that would strain her already tight budget. The stern judge, Wilson, seemed uninterested in her circumstances. "Everyone has a reason for breaking the law," the judge said coldly, ready to impose the standard penalty. But something unexpected happened. A young man in a crisp suit approached the bench and whispered something that made the judge pause. His tone changed immediately. "Miss Thompson, are you Counselor Mary Thompson from East Millfield?" The courtroom fell silent. Mary confirmed she was indeed that counselor. She explained her urgent mission, addressing the terrible water contamination affecting families in her district. "Families can't drink from their taps," she said quietly but firmly. The judge looked uncomfortable. For the first time, he truly saw Mary not just another person breaking a traffic rule, but someone genuinely trying to help her community. The low-income families she mentioned were often overlooked, struggling with basic necessities while authorities remained distant. Judge Wilson's expression softened. He announced a sudden 15-minute recess, leaving the courtroom buzzing with whispers and curiosity. In his private chamber, he reflected on his own approach to justice. How many times had he simply applied rules without understanding the human stories behind each case? He remembered his early days as a young lawyer, passionate about making a real difference. Somewhere along the way, he had become mechanical, more interested in following procedures than understanding people's real challenges. Mary's passionate explanation about the water crisis reminded him why he had initially chosen law: to help people, not just punish them. When the recess ended, the courtroom waited with anticipation. Judge Wilson returned, looking thoughtful. He addressed Mary directly, his voice softer than before. "Ms. Thompson, tell me more about this water contamination issue," he requested. Mary explained how the district's water supply had been compromised, primarily affecting low-income neighborhoods. Families were suffering, children were at risk, and local authorities had been slow to respond. The judge listened carefully. He asked detailed questions about the water crisis, the number of families affected, and the steps Mary had been taking to address the problem. His previous dismissive attitude had completely transformed. "The speeding charge," he said finally, "will be reduced to a warning. Your work is important, and getting to that meeting seems critical." Mary felt relief wash over her. It wasn't just about avoiding the fine, it was about being heard, about someone in a position of power actually listening and understanding her community's struggles. The courtroom witnessed a small but significant moment of human connection. A judge who had previously seen only rules now saw a person's genuine commitment to helping others. Mary's determination to fight for her community had broken through his professional armor. As she left the courtroom, Mary felt a sense of hope. Not just for herself, but for the families waiting for help back in East Millfield. Sometimes, all it takes is one person listening, one moment of genuine understanding to create the potential for change. Judge Wilson watched her go, reflecting on the lesson he had just learned. Justice wasn't just about applying rules blindly, but about understanding the human stories behind each case. He knew he would approach his future cases differently, with more empathy and less rigid judgment. The young man who had initially whispered to the judge smiled quietly. He understood that sometimes, a small intervention could lead to a significant shift in perspective. Outside the courthouse, the city continued its bustling rhythm, unaware of the small but meaningful transformation that had just occurred in one courtroom, where a judge had been reminded of the true meaning of justice. Here's the story in simple, third-person narrative style. The courtroom felt different when Judge Wilson returned. Something had changed in his eyes, a softness that wasn't there before. Mary Thompson waited nervously, unsure what would happen next. "Miss Thompson," the judge said, his voice much gentler than earlier, "I've reconsidered your case." Mary looked up, surprised. The stern judge who moments ago seemed ready to punish her without a second thought now appeared genuinely interested in her situation. Instead of the heavy fine she expected, Judge Wilson proposed something unexpected. He would replace the £200 penalty with 20 hours of community service. More importantly, these hours could be completed through her ongoing work addressing the water crisis in East Millfield. "Thank you, Your Honor," Mary said, relief washing over her. But the judge wasn't finished. He wanted to understand more about the water problem. Mary explained how the district's old pipes were dangerous. Some were over 50 years old, with tests showing high levels of lead contamination. 3 children had already been hospitalized because of the terrible water quality. Judge Wilson listened carefully. He realized this wasn't just a minor issue, it was a serious health problem affecting vulnerable families. His professional role suddenly felt more meaningful. He wasn't just a judge enforcing rules, but someone who could potentially help make a real difference. "I have connections at the county level," he told Mary. "Would you be interested in discussing how we might bring more attention to this matter?" A small smile appeared on Mary's face. What had started as a simple traffic violation was turning into a potential opportunity to help her community. The other people in the courtroom watched silently. They were witnessing something rare, a moment where understanding bridged the gap between two very different lives. A powerful judge and a dedicated community worker finding common ground. Mary's dedication had touched something in Judge Wilson. He saw beyond her speeding ticket to the larger issue of community welfare. Her passion for helping low-income families affected by the water crisis had broken through his usual professional detachment. As the next case was called, whispers spread through the courtroom. People discussed what they had just witnessed, a small but significant moment of human connection. A judge showing compassion. A community worker getting a chance to make a real difference. For Mary, this day represented hope. Her persistent efforts to highlight the water crisis might finally get the attention they deserved. The ticket that could have been a setback was now a potential turning point. Judge Wilson felt something shift inside him. He remembered why he had become a judge in the first place, not just to enforce laws, but to serve justice and help people. Mary's story had reminded him of that fundamental purpose. The young court assistant who had earlier whispered to the judge watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. Sometimes, a small intervention could lead to meaningful change. Outside the courthouse, the city continued its daily rhythm. Most people would never know about this particular moment, a traffic violation that became something much more significant. A story of unexpected understanding, of seeing beyond rules to the human stories behind them. Mary left the courthouse with a sense of renewed energy. Her fight for her community wasn't over, in fact, it might have just gained a powerful new ally. Judge Wilson's willingness to listen and help could make a real difference for the families of East Millfield. As she walked out, the weight of the potential fine gone, replaced by a chance to continue her important work, Mary felt hopeful. Sometimes, justice isn't about punishment, but about understanding and working together to solve real problems. The courtroom returned to its usual busy state, but something had changed. A small spark of compassion had shown that sometimes, the most important conversations happen in the most unexpected places. Here's the story in simple, third-person narrative style. 1 month after the courtroom encounter, Judge Wilson visited East Millfield. The neighborhood looked different from what he had expected. Small, neat houses lined the streets. Children played in tiny gardens. Despite their challenges, families clearly took pride in their homes. Mary Thompson showed him a map of the area. She pointed out the homes most affected by the water crisis. "These pipes haven't been replaced since the 1960s, she explained. The judge's face grew serious. "How long has the city known about this problem?" he asked. 3 years, Mary answered. "But East Millfield always seems to be the last on anyone's priority list." As they walked through the neighborhood, residents watched with hope and curiosity. An elderly woman named Emma approached slowly. She carried a glass of water that looked cloudy and strange. "This is what comes out of my tap, Judge," Emma said quietly. Her voice was calm but sad. She had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years and had seen many challenges. Judge Wilson took the glass and examined the water carefully. The discolored liquid looked nothing like clean drinking water. "This is unacceptable," he told Emma. "No one should have to live like this." The judge saw the faces of worried parents and tired children. He understood now why Mary had been so passionate about solving this problem. This wasn't just about water, it was about human dignity. That evening, Judge Wilson made important phone calls. He reached out to old friends who could help. A newspaper editor, a health department official, and a former law school classmate who now worked for the governor all received his urgent messages. "I need your help," he told each of them. "There's an injustice happening that we need to fix." Mary watched with quiet pride. Her months of fighting for her community were finally getting serious attention. The judge who once seemed distant and uncaring was now a powerful ally. The residents of East Millfield began to feel hope. For years, they had been ignored. Their water problems had been pushed aside, forgotten by city officials who didn't understand their daily struggles. Now, someone with real power was listening. Judge Wilson realized this was about more than just replacing old pipes. It was about showing a community that they mattered. That their health and well-being were important. That someone was willing to fight for them. Emma's cloudy water glass became a powerful symbol. It represented years of neglect, but also the potential for change. One conversation in a courtroom had led to this moment of possible transformation. The judge knew his work was just beginning. Making phone calls was only the first step. He would need to push hard to get the city to take real action. But he was committed now, fully understanding the human cost of bureaucratic indifference. Mary appreciated how the judge had changed. He wasn't just following rules anymore. He was trying to create real justice, the kind that improves people's actual lives. As night fell over East Millfield, a sense of hope spread through the neighborhood. The residents didn't know exactly what would happen next, but they felt something important had changed. Someone was finally paying attention. The tiny gardens, the neat houses, the children playing, all of these spoke of a community that deserved better. And now, they had someone willing to help them fight for their rights. Judge Wilson's perspective had been completely transformed. What started as a simple traffic ticket had become a mission to help an entire community. He understood now that true justice wasn't about punishing people, but about making things right. The water crisis in East Millfield was far from over. But for the first time in years, the residents felt they weren't alone in their struggle. One judge, one community worker, and a glass of cloudy water had started something important. Change was coming to East Millfield. And it all began with a moment of unexpected understanding in a busy courthouse. Here's the story in simple, third-person narrative style. 3 months had passed since that important day in court. Now, the community center of East Millfield was filled with hope and excitement. Outside, workers were replacing the old water pipes that had caused so much trouble for years. Emma, the elderly woman who had shown Judge Wilson the cloudy water, stood with tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd see this day," she said softly. "Clean water for our children and grandchildren." The entire situation had changed dramatically. A newspaper had run a front-page story about the water crisis. The health department had declared an emergency. The governor had even visited the neighborhood personally. Judge Wilson stood next to Mary Thompson, both of them watching the progress outside. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't stood your ground that day in court," he told her quietly. Mary smiled and shook her head. "And none of it would have happened if you hadn't been willing to listen and change your mind," she replied. The room was full of hopeful faces. People who had been forgotten for years were now seeing real change. The judge looked around, understanding something important he had missed before. "Justice isn't just about following rules," he told the gathered crowd. "It's about seeing people. Really seeing them." Back in his courtroom, Judge Wilson made a big change. Before passing judgment on anyone, he would now ask a simple question: "Is there anything else I should know?" He began to listen more carefully. He tried to understand people's stories before deciding on any punishment. What had started as a simple traffic ticket had completely transformed him. He realized that every person who came before him had a story, a human story worth hearing. The people of East Millfield celebrated their new water system. Children could now drink clean water from their taps. Families felt hope they hadn't felt in years. Mary's months of hard work had finally paid off. Emma represented all the residents who had suffered for so long. Her quiet determination, her years of living with poor water, had helped create this moment of change. She represented the power of speaking truth to authority. Judge Wilson thought about how quickly his life had changed. One moment of listening, one moment of truly seeing another person, had opened up an entire world of understanding. He was no longer just a judge who followed rules, he was someone who tried to understand human stories. The water pipes outside represented more than just infrastructure. They were a symbol of hope, of justice, of community coming together. Each pipe replaced was a small victory for the people of East Millfield. Mary continued her work, knowing that this was just the beginning. There were still many communities that needed help, many voices that needed to be heard. But today was a victory worth celebrating. The judge understood now that mercy and justice were not opposite things. They could work together. Understanding someone's situation didn't mean ignoring the law, it meant applying the law with human compassion. As workers continued to replace the old pipes, the community center buzzed with excitement. Children played, older residents shared stories, and a sense of hope filled the air. They had fought for their rights, and they had won. Judge Wilson realized that true justice was about more than punishment. It was about listening, understanding, and helping people improve their lives. That simple traffic ticket had taught him more about justice than years of legal training. The story of East Millfield would become an example. A story of how one person's determination, combined with another's willingness to listen, could create real change. A story of hope, of community, of justice finding its true meaning. Sometimes, the most important changes start with a simple conversation. Sometimes, understanding can replace judgment. And sometimes, the most powerful tool for change is simply listening. The old water pipes were going, replaced by new ones that promised clean, safe water. And with them, an old way of thinking was also being replaced by something more human, more compassionate, more just.